So I'm trying something a little different now, as you know, SummerSlam's coming up in a few weeks, and I saw that Mr. Narrator did a review of Fully Loaded 2000 on his channel, and that kind of gave me the idea that I might want to review one of the first pay-per-views that I ever saw when it was a recent show, because at the time that this show, SummerSlam 2000, came out, I was still learning a lot about how wrestling worked. You know, I had seen some shows on home video, and I had seen Fully Loaded 2000 was actually my first pay-per-view, and this was my second as a recent show, having recorded it on ordinary blank tape. So for me, this show had a lot of firsts. You know, there was one big first that becomes very obvious when you look at the card we have here, and then there were a bunch of little firsts that I want you to keep in mind during this review, because we will be mentioning a lot of those as I go along. We opened up this show with Steven Richards, Bull Buchanan, and the Goodfather, the team of Right to Censor, against Scotty, Hotty, Grandmaster Sexay, and Rikishi. Too cool. This was fun. You know, you had a good cast of characters here. You know, you had Right to Censor, who, in the Attitude Era, the worst thing you could ever think of was censorship, so these guys were very easy to hate. And then you had Too Cool, who were able to get over the way they did, even though they had a kind of like a kiddie gimmick in the Attitude Era, so that was kind of interesting. And they just had a good cast of characters doing their signature moves, and a fun way to open the show, I thought. You know, I feel like the one gripe about this, the way this was done, was the ending, in which, you know, you had Rikishi attempting the stink face and he was blocked, and you had Scotty Hotty attempt the worm and he was blocked off as well. You figure that they would have given us at least one of those two moves to kind of pop the crowd and get them more excited for the show. But that's the only gripe I have about this match. 2.5 stars. I thought it was fun for what it was. Then we got on to Dogg against X-Pac, kind of D-Generation X going against each other. And I thought this was interesting at the time of watching this, when I was like, what, 7, almost 8. Because I had, you know, I was still learning a lot about wrestling, and I had just got used to the idea of tag team wrestling, and now I was seeing tag team partners going against each other. So I thought that was kind of interesting at the time, even though the match was, you know, pretty much a nothing match. It was short, not a lot of good action, but it was still interesting because, you know, I kind of opened myself up to the idea that, you know, tag team partners are not beyond the conflict of what pro wrestling is. You know, everyone can find someone to have a competitive match with, even if it's a tag team partner. That's kind of that kind of way. No one is your true ally. That's kind of the idea, kind of engraved in my mind. So that was interesting. You know, I thought it was a 2-star match. It was fine. I didn't really mind it. I thought it was fun. Then we get to Eddie Guerrero and Chyna against Venis and X-Pac in a mixed tag team match for the Intercontinental Championship. Again, very interesting, because here you have Chyna, who was intriguing at the time, and he was having some interplay against Venis, and she was taking him down with clotheslines and shoulder blocks, and that was interesting to think that she could do that to a guy, because I had seen her before, you know, being the manager for Eddie Guerrero, but this is kind of the first time I saw her in a pay-per-view match, and also the first time I saw her winning the IC Championship, even though it wasn't her first reign. So again, very interesting, and there was some good action in this match as well. You know, 2 3/4 stars. I thought it was fun, had no problems with it. Just more kind of the firsts that were going on during this show. Now we come to another one, Lawler against Tazz. And here we have Lawler, who I had just gotten used to as a commentator, now starting to go into the ring, and I realized, hey, this guy can wrestle. And even though the match was kind of just passable, it was just kind of short and passable and not all that, nothing to write home about, here you have, you know, Lawler and JR, who are very much appreciated by wrestling fans, and Lawler was very over, and it was kind of the thing that kind of got me through the match, up until the ending, where I see JR, who I had kind of written off at the time as this frail old man who talked about wrestling as opposed to actually doing it, go up to the ring apron and smash Tazz over the head with a glass container, and that was just very fun for me at the time. So I thought that was fun, and I thought the match in general, short but fun, you know, 2.5 stars, nothing to complain about there. You know, you think about what Tazz could have been doing when he was doing this, and you kind of feel a little sad about it, because, you know, Tazz was such a great talent. He could have been doing much more than this, but he put a lot of effort into, you know, he just put a lot of effort into whatever he was given to do, and that was kind of what kept interest in something like this. But he could have been doing so much more. It's too late to complain about that now, but they could have used him so much better. Moving on, we got to the Hardcore Championship match between Shane McMahon and Steve Blackman. Again, very fun, and again, something new that I had never seen. Okay, that's not true. That's not true. I had seen some crazy stuff before, because the first show I ever saw, period, in wrestling was Bad Blood 97 on home video. Do we really need to remember what the main event of that show was? No, we don't. So I had seen some crazy stuff before, but even this, the insane spot at the end, was just amazing for me at the time, and I still think it's awe-inspiring to look at how they did that, and whether or not, you wonder whether or not they did it safely, but, Vince McMahon and the WWE have them rehearse those kind of moves, and I'm sure they have enough precautions in place, especially when it's, Vince McMahon's son, so I wouldn't start concerning myself with that. And, the match up to that point was kind of like typical hardcore silliness, just kind of entertaining to watch, so I had no problem with that. 3 stars. The spot at the end is amazing, but everything else up to that point was kind of fun as well. A good highlight of the show. And then we get to the underwhelming part of the show, at least, in terms of wrestling, which was Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Underwhelming to say the least. You had a 2 out of 3 falls match, short for a 2 out of 3 falls match, and yet it felt like it dragged. And there was some good action, they didn't really get a good story going. The finishers kind of came at random intervals with no real flow going forward. It was just kind of a very underwhelming match. Definitely not the best match these guys have had and could have had right here, because they had 13 minutes. How could they? They didn't have a bad match by any means, but it was 3 1/4, just underwhelming, just not what these guys can do at their best. But here's something that was at its very best for the time. The Tag Team Championships, Edge and Christian versus the Hardys against the Dudleys in the first TLC match. For anyone who has seen the Money in the Bank matches and has not, and then watches this after being assimilated to what ladder matches are these days, might think that this is kind of like a fast-forward version of what this kind of match should be. But to me at the time, and I'm sure to many people at the time, this was amazing. And all the familiar spots are there. Falling off the ladder through the table, going through stacks of ladders, hanging on to the title belts with no ladder to support you. All those spots I was seeing there for the first time are right here, and that's just kind of significant to me, and I think this is amazing. I think this is, they went all out to just deliver an amazing match, and the crazy thing about this is, a few months later they're going to go to the WrestleMania X7 match and they're going to top it. The WrestleMania 17 match is even better than this, but this is still amazing. Definitely the best thing on this show. I'm going to go ahead and give it 4.5. Someone who didn't see it at the time might not give it that, because the Money in the Bank matches have done crazier shit that's in this, but to me this is just amazing. Definitely the match of the night. Then we get to the Cat versus Terri in a Stinkface match. Bleh, short, harmless fun. Doesn't take away from the show really, because it only went 3 minutes or something. I can give it an NA. I can't really say this is done because it didn't take away from the show. Just kind of short, bit of harmless fun, no problem there. Then we get to something that does take away from the show, and I mean that very seriously. The Undertaker versus Kane, and I'm a big fan of the WrestleMania 14 match and some other matches they might have had around that time, but it had some okay brawling before they got to the finish, which was just so awkward and just so, I hadn't even gotten used to the idea at the time, because I had been watching wrestling for only so short a time that matches could end in bizarre ways. I was really getting used to that, and then they have such an awkward finish with the Undertaker taking Kane's mask off, and I don't think there was any follow up to this. So just kind of random match, random ending, just not a good match. The worst thing on this show, 1 3/4. It was, it wasn't horrible to watch, but just an awkward ending. Then we get to the main event for the WWF Championship, The Rock defending against Triple H and Kurt Angle. Very unsure about the extent of Kurt Angle's injuries at the start of the match when they botched, well they didn't botch, but the table gave way before it was supposed to for the spot there. But they did compensate well for the loss of Angle, even though the action going on in the first part of the match between the Triple H and The Rock was kind of bland. They put Stephanie in there to add some drama, but this match really picked up once Angle returned to the match, and then you got some drama going on, some good false finishes, and that's kind of what led it to a dramatic finish with The Rock retaining. So it was a very, very good match, not a great match. I think this, if Angle had been in the match the whole time, this would have been a lot better. But as it stands, just a very good match, but a very dramatic match, and 3 3/4, I thought was very, very good once Angle got back in there and led the match to a good conclusion. Overall, I give this a 7.75. I don't think it's a great SummerSlam, because even though the undercard is solid, there's a lot of forgettable stuff. There's not really a lot on this show that's very memorable. Even the best thing on this show, the TLC match, is overshadowed by the WrestleMania 17 match that came months later, and that's what. And when you think about the early ladder matches to an extent, you think about the WrestleMania 17 match. That's the one that gets replayed on the kind of like the highlight packages that WWE runs these days. This match doesn't. The SummerSlam match doesn't at all. So. The best thing on this show, the most memorable thing on this show, gets overshadowed not long after it. So there's a lot of forgettable stuff on here, but I still think it's a very good SummerSlam, and I give it a 7.75. That's all from me. I'm out. Later.